Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm Senior Literary Agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
Welcome, everybody. We are excited today to have with us editor Carina Licon from Holt Books for Young Readers from Macmillan Publishing Group. Stephanie, will you tell us a bit about...
We're so happy to welcome Carina today. As you said, she's the assistant editor at Henry Holt Books for Young Readers, Macmillan Children's Publishing Group. She's interested in middle grade and YA with a focus on books featuring underrepresented stories and voices. She's especially reeled in by character-driven stories with whip-smart protagonists, spooky and atmospheric middle grade speculative fiction, contemporary YA thrillers in the vein of Jane Anonymous or Sadie, friendship breakup stories, romance with lots of angst, and stories rich with diverse cultural traditions and storytelling. Born and raised in El Paso, Texas, Carina enjoys discovering local restaurants, movie podcasts, and spending time with her very intimidating 8-pound guard dog. Which now I need to know your dog's name.
I know.
What is the dog's name?
His name is Dempsey, like Patsy.
Oh, okay.
Well, will he be guest starring? I hope he just comes through.
He's very cat, so he might make an appearance behind me on the sofa
what kind
here.
of dog is he?
So he's a Maltese.
They're so cute.
Yes, very small.
Very fun.
So fun.
That is fun. We also are very grateful that you came on so that we could introduce you to our audience because you're going to be the guest at our retreat, and we're very excited to see you in person at our retreat.
And for those lucky retreat participants who are going to get to learn from you, we're so excited. Yeah.
Setting with writers, really exciting to me because so much of the interaction on this side of things is just virtual, and it's always nice to see when a light bulb just is set off in a writer's mind. So I'm really excited about this. Back in college, I used to work in a writing center. Cool. I miss that one-on-one collaboration that you get in person. So I'm very excited and thrilled to be participating.
We're excited to have you.
Thank you. That's where the magic happens, right?
Yes, exactly.
when you're all in the same room together.
There is an energy that you can't get any other way, I think. Some editors, actually someone I just talked to today, leans much toward character or theme, or some lean a lot towards plot. What is your process for identifying the main areas of a manuscript that need improvement?
So when I'm reading stories, I naturally gravitate towards stories that have a lot of voice packed in them in those first 10 pages, something that really has a strong sense of character. So for that reason, when a story is missing those elements in the first couple pages, first couple chapters, my brain starts working overtime to figure out how we can get that into the pages. It's just something that I feel like I instinctually look for, just because I like when a character feels like someone I could know in real life. Someone that has this off-page life that we don't necessarily see in this story, but they just already feel so fleshed out and layered. So I immediately look for characters and a voice that pack a punch. And then from there, I'll go into, okay, what are they doing and why are they doing it? And those elements of the story. But yes, right away, I think when I'm reading a story, I look for anything that's character-driven and voicey.
So Carina, since as we're talking about revision, how do you balance preserving the author's voice while still making the necessary changes?
So the way that I approach my relationships with my authors is always collaboratively, and that's every step of the way. So from the first time that I'm reading the story to when I'm first having a call with them, talking about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, it's always leaving the author in a position of power because this is their story. They wrote it from their own experiences and their own passions. So right off the bat, I feel like when it comes to preserving the author's voice, that's just naturally there because I'm never overstepping. I essentially always give the author the agency that they deserve. But that said, I am in the position of editor, so I am making suggestions to help better the story, and I'm coming from a different perspective, I think, where maybe, I know that some authors have maybe a particular chapter that they're really beholden to or that they hold special, or, there's certain scenes that they really hold close to their heart, and maybe they're just not working for the story. My approach is always a collaborative one, but I think when it's for the betterment of the story, we just talk about, okay, are we okay with cutting this? And if we're not, how can we change this to fix the issues that I'm seeing, while keeping it, if that's your vision?
I love that collaborative mentality, because I like to think that most editors have that in mind. But I think sometimes as an author, the fear is that it's not going to be their story anymore, or they're going to be forced maybe to change something in order to make the sale. So it's really comforting to hear you say that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might just forget how long and how much work an author has put into their novel. As an editor, when it's coming across my desk, this book has already been through so many revisions before it's got into an agent. It's gone through revisions with an agent. It's finally coming across my desk, and it could be easy for me to just chop away at it. But yeah, I just always keep that top of mind, that for a lot of authors, this is years worth of work for them.
I'm sure your authors appreciate that too.
Yeah.
Makes it more
Yeah,
fun.
Absolutely.
I've just started acquiring about 3 years ago, so my list is small right now, but I always want to keep that same mentality. I love my authors, and I want us to be a little family.
It's great, though, on the flip side, that you are going to say, hey, that darling that you have, is it moving our story along? Or maybe it needs to take a nap and join us in another book. So that's great that you're also pushing your authors to, reach their full potential, even though they might not see it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why my approach is always to include an author call with any of my editorial notes as well. I like talking through all the suggestions that I'm offering to them. And like we were talking earlier, just about collaboration, I think we can't necessarily do it in person, but I think it's always important to just bounce ideas off one another. And you can do that over a phone call or a Zoom meeting too.
I love that approach. I try to do that as well. I think sometimes, I know my authors, they like sometimes ask me permission, and I'm always like, no, this is your story. Like, you need to take charge of it. I'm just making suggestions. And for them, it's the same fear that I'm not going to send it out if they don't do what I say. And I think it's really easy when you're in a position like that for someone who's not more maybe sure of themselves or whatever to feel like you're forcing changes on them. Sometimes I send authors my edit notes and track changes and comments in the manuscript, and this doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough that it worries me. It comes back in worse shape after So what are some common mistakes that you see authors make during revisions, and how can they avoid those mistakes?
I think that when this happens, it's because I can't speak to when it happens for others, but I think like the situations that I've been a part of and experienced, I think authors get tunnel vision for a particular critique that I've made or a suggestion, and it's usually always with the higher level concerns when I'm asking for more emotion from the character. So then we veer from the story being very fast-paced, intense, and focused on the action and the plot, and now we're just sitting way too long in this character's headspace. Things are moving slower. That's just one example. But I think they have a tendency to just tunnel vision in that way. So my suggestion would be to just look at things holistically. And when it comes to revisions, especially if it's not like a major overhaul as far as plot points and like laying out the plot and conflict, I think less is more in a sense, and it's all about just sprinkling in those suggestions instead of necessarily making sure those changes are on every single page of the next draft.
Very wise.
Can I ask you both, Carina and Heather, kind of a side follow-up question with that? After I've had my call with you and I make my revisions, would you recommend then I go through my critique partners, or at least one, to make sure that I haven't made a mess of something that maybe just needed a few tweaks. Is that something you would recommend authors do?
Heather, do you want to take this one first?
For something like a novel, especially, right? A picture book is shorter, right? But a novel.
I think this is a hard question for me because, yes, I think sometimes... Yeah, okay, so I'm just going to say it depends on how good your critique partners are.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think that once you start getting to these higher level craft issues, if your critique group is not at the same level as that, then sometimes I think it can cause problems. But I do think that if you have a critique group who's willing to look at the suggested edits and then also look at what you've done and say, have I accomplished what this set out to accomplish? And it might not mean that you have done exactly what the editor asked for, or the agent, or whatever. Maybe you came up with an even more, this happens all the time to me too. Like my authors will come up with an even more creative way to solve the issue that I saw than I would even think of or had suggested. So yeah, it does help because it's just one more kind of little polish that they can say, oh yes, this worked or this didn't work. But I think only if they're willing to look at what was asked for and then say, yes, you did accomplish it, or these issues are now springing up because you did X, Y, Z, or whatever. Oh, look how cute.
Hey, puppy.
I knew it would happen
Puppy
eventually.
came to
It's just a
join
matter
us.
of time.
Yeah.
How are you? Where'd he go?
Yes, just a twinkie little
He's
cat
hiding.
there. Oh, yeah.
That's from my display too.
Aww.
Yes, he's so very cat-like. He loves it up there.
Cute.
It's hilarious.
Well, no, Heather, that was a great answer to that. I feel a little stumped on it as well, just because I'm not in very many situations where authors have critique groups at all. You know what I mean? Like they're coming to me at a place where some have only had the agent, or they might feel like a manuscript is just too far along, I think, to share with a critique group, or maybe they've outgrown it a little bit. When authors have questions like these, are they on the right track? I always prefer that they reach out to me. Most of the time, it's honestly just a matter of reassuring them, because I'm not the creative one. They always come up with these creative solutions to the problems that I'm calling out and asking for revision on. So I try never to be prescriptive. You can fix it this way. You can fix it that way. They usually always come up with really great and creative ways. So I always just suggest that they come and bounce their ideas off me and before they get too far into anything.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think too, it depends on where you are in the edit. If you're doing like foundational developmental edits, then you're going to be reading with that in mind. If I have a client who's doing a developmental edit, I'm not even going to look at her line. Like, I'm not even going to look at the line stuff right now because there's no point. I don't know. Carina, do you get a lot of developmental edits? Like big developmental edits?
I do. I always strive for about 3 rounds of revisions, and those first 2 are always developmental. More often than not. Like, we do get a lot of manuscripts that are very clean when they come to us and when we acquire them, so we'll probably move to the line edit stage a little sooner. But I'm always focusing on the big picture things before anything, like pacing, stakes, conflict, character development. And then I go into the nitty-gritty of line edits, yeah.
So, Carina, if I'm one of your authors and I get that editor feedback letter, what do you want your authors to look at and focus on first? It sounds like big picture, but I've got lots of edits. Where do I go? What do I panic about first?
Right. So like I mentioned earlier, I always like to have that call to recap. And I think it's a good way to go because more often than not, authors have questions about something that I didn't include in the letter. And I try to be as robust as possible in my notes and cover a lot of areas. But when an author has something that's been bothering them, I'm not aware of it. Is this character coming off right? Is this plot point clearing things up for you and things like that? So first things first is I want to make sure that I covered all that you're concerned with as a writer in the editorial letter. And then from there, I think it's important for us to just get on the same page. Do we all agree? Do we both agree with my suggestions? Do you feel that the things that I think are issues, do you also feel like those aren't hitting the way that they should in the story? And then as far as tackling revisions, I'm not a writer myself, so I can't say what's best and what to do first. But I do know a lot of my authors like to go the route of just diving in. They just go track changes and start sprinkling things in and just using the editorial letter as a checklist, basically. Just, did I address this question here or there? Yes, I did, and cross things off from there.
Yeah, that sounds like a good approach, a logical approach, which I like.
Yeah. I can see why it would be very easy for an author to get overwhelmed.
Yeah, when you first see it. When you're like, oh my
Oh,
gosh.
yeah. The catalog. You're like,
Exactly.
okay, I need a break. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to go eat some chocolate, maybe have a glass of wine. I'll be back, but
Maybe not for a few days.
yeah.
Unless you're on a
it
really
just
tight
feels-
deadline and then you're back at it. It just
Right?
depends, yeah.
That's true.
Yep.
So, Carina, my question is about rewrite versus revision, but I just thought of a first question. I know there's editors that when they get a manuscript submitted to them, they might like the idea or think that the voice and writing is good, but it needs so much rewrite and revision that they feel like they need to pass because of how long it will take to get it to where it needs to. So I guess my first question is, do you feel that way? Or do you feel like if there's something that, if you see this nugget of just magic, that you don't mind working on a whole rewrite with the author?
I have requested a revise and resubmit once before.
Okay.
The process for going through this was, like you said, a nugget. Like, the premise is just so strong that I can't let go of it. But the first thing with a revise and resubmit is that I always want to talk to the agent, and by extension the author as well, because if our visions don't align for what that revision will be, it doesn't make sense to move forward. You know what I mean? But if those visions do align, I think the best way to move forward is, it's like working in reverse. I think this title isn't necessarily signed up, but we're already having an author editor call. We're talking revisions, and it stinks because you don't have that commitment. I think that an author who's already had the deal signed, put away.
Yes.
So it's hard. I can see why that's hard. But I will say also that I think revise and resubmits aren't all that common when it comes to editors who have very large lists, long lists. And I think that just comes from schedule, their workload. So I do find that it's more common for someone like me who's earlier in their career building their list to want to take that dive in with a potential author and hack away at what could be that golden nugget.
Okay.
I've had many revise and resubmits for my clients, and they were all with young editors.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is true. And if I'm going to do an R&R, I have to see something in it that is just fabulous. Like, maybe the line work is fabulous and the craft is just so good and the premise is good, but there's no plot. And then I'll give a letter or whatever. But I have to really love it, because when I give a revise and resubmit, I give us like several $1,000s worth of editing from back when I was a professional editor. That's what I give. And I think that in order to do that, you have to really feel pretty passionate about it.
Yeah. And most of the revise and resubmits that I consider are picture books, because I think for some reason, those are just the ones that I think need a little bit more tweaking. And you have so little space. And you only have a couple hundred words, and a line can change your picture book drastically. Those are a lot of the revise and resubmits I consider. And like Heather was saying, for me, a big part is narrative. Like, you can have the characters, you can have a package forming in front of with a cover and just like something that's so eye-catching. But yeah, we need something that just propels the plot forward. And I feel like a lot of the picture books that I see are missing that narrative.
Well, and two, another reason I do a revise and resubmit is because I want to see if number one, like you said, their vision aligns. But number two, if they can actually pull it off. Mm-hmm. Like signing them when things need so much work is, it's a risk for me. Anyway, it's a big risk.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay, so follow up to that. How do you suggest authors complete a rewrite versus targeted revisions? And how does an author know when they get your letter which one it requires? Do I need to overhaul and rewrite, or is it just targeted revisions? I assume this is something you discussed then on your call.
Yeah, I think this is something that's such a big question that I wouldn't leave the author up to determining that on their own. Because it would be a waste of time to just let them sit there wondering, do I start over completely? Do I just work on revisions? All those kinds of things. Like I said, like we always start off with higher level concerns. So at that point, I think is when we would decide, is this a rewrite? Is this a few revisions here and there? What are we going for in this next round?
Mm-hmm. What happens when you send that letter and your author comes back and says, nope, I don't like these ideas. I don't want to do it. What happens when you guys disagree, when your author disagrees with your suggestions?
It happened. Not all my authors are as open to a lot of my suggestions. And like I said, I'm open to that. I want them to speak their mind with me. A lot of the times the suggestions that we're making, especially when it comes to things like cover, title, copy, jacket copy, it's coming from a place of sitting in a room with departments like sales, marketing, and publicity. And I know that's not necessarily true for the story itself, because so much of that is just editorial, but sometimes it is. Like a plot point needs to be a little bit more compelling, it needs to be a little bit more time sensitive, it needs to be a little bit more unpackageable. More often than not, that's the place we're coming from, and it sucks that we have to consider those things, but we just do. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like books have to sell, books have to make money, and once I kind of level with them and I explain where I'm coming from, we kind of find some common ground there.
That's good advice. And the author he or she wants their books to sell. You want to get them into the hands. Yeah. I think it's understanding that you're both after the same goal probably would help somewhat too.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. We're on the same side, basically.
Not adversarial. You're both trying to get the best product out there that you can. So, yeah.
I think that's a big part of being, like, we talk a lot here about finding your path to publishing. And I think that's a big part of trade publishing, is that you need to go into it with a more open mind. I think it's important for you to know your book well enough that you know why you put things in, and you know why you didn't put things in, why your plot goes where it goes, and how that affects the theme and all those kind of things. Because I think that in trade publishing, you are there to make money. That's the whole idea behind trade, is that this is a business and you're not putting it out there for your grandma to read or for your family. You're going to make money, right?
Right.
And also for the love of the books. Of course, we're all here for the passion. None of us make enough money to not do that. But,
right, of course.
But it's good to be realistic when you go into it, and when you get an agent, when you get an editor and a book deal. So I have found that there are like 3 major issues when I edit. The first one is always character motivations. People, I don't know what it is, but you don't know what the character actually wants at the beginning of the book. And because of that, you don't, at least me, I don't really connect. And then the other thing is the voice. I feel like there has to be a voice that is unique and compelling, and something that makes me think, oh, I want to spend hours with this person. Yeah.
I want to spend years working on this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's true though. All right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then stakes, like what's going to happen if the character doesn't get what they want, and things like that. I think those are the issues that I see the most. And I think that hopefully authors will be open to discussing those things.
Yeah, definitely.
So what do you look for, Carina, when you're evaluating a character's motivations and development?
Yeah, I'm always looking for something that's voice driven and character driven. So I think I've come to find a really easy way to suggest to an author that that's always present in the story. So my kind of strategy for making sure that the character development is consistent and there and present is taking a look at your character. I always suggest to my authors that they do a kind of character study. Like, they should know who this character was before the story even started, what their life was like, because otherwise we're not really coming into meeting this character and really understanding or feeling how their life has changed. Like, we don't understand the gravity of it, because usually we're always meeting a character when something's changing. Something's setting something off, they're coming head to head with a conflict, things are different. So we need to like really feel the gravity of change for that character. So that's where the character study comes into play. Who were they growing up? What was their favorite childhood TV show and why? I think all of those things are so important to just making a character feel really layered and realized. And I think it'll just naturally come into the writing when you're trying to weave in those details. The second thing in that is that the plot and the character journey should always be interacting. Whenever a key moment happens in the story, how was the character feeling before this and how are they feeling now? And how are those like differences manifesting? Are they acting different? Do they feel different? Are their views and positions on something different? And having those clear markers in the story that show how the character is progressing, I think will just make sure that development is constantly present. And there can be different ways to weave that in, of course, because as a character, as a main character goes through the story and the narrative, some go backwards in their development, some go forwards and then take a step backwards and then they reach their full potential at the end. But yeah, I think just making sure that whenever something big happens, we take a look at that character development, that journey, that voice.
I think that's really good advice. That's something I want to go back and look at on my stories.
Yeah.
You all just got a workshop from
I'm happy to help.
Yeah. Also, okay, so this is something that I always struggle with in, especially in writing kid lit, is ensuring that the stakes are compelling and high enough, because we can't have every single story about the world ending. So that can't be our compelling stakes every time. So how do you evaluate whether that story has stakes that are high enough and compelling enough to make it work?
Yeah. So my easy answer is throw in a time-sensitive element in there. I love a good time-sensitive element. One of my first acquisitions was a young adult romance, and that took place over only 24 hours on the day. This best friends to enemies to lovers, a whole journey has to happen in 24 hours. So I think my easy answer would be having a time-sensitive component to the story. That's something to just really build in tension right off the bat, and it just automatically builds in something that's keeping us to a timeline and keeping us to some sort of action and taking action. The harder answer and harder route, I think, for an author to go is, again, it all comes back to character development. If you know this character like the front and back of your hand, anything that happens to them that feels like it's shifting their world does feel world ending. Does that make sense?
That's like really well said.
Yeah, and it's not world ending for us, but if you successfully find a way to make the reader connect with this character, then it should feel world ending. So, it's not necessarily like aliens coming down to Earth to abduct humans or anything like that, but something as simple as losing your best friend at a formative age can be world ending, and it should be for your main character.
Yeah, I like the idea that knowing the character and knowing what the stakes are for them, because that's very individualized. It can be really different for every character that you develop. Thanks, that's helpful.
How can an author refine a manuscript to make the narrative voice more distinctive and engaging, in your opinion?
I think I'm hesitant to give the same answer that I've been giving, but again, I think it just comes down to a character study, a strong character study. That, and also just being really in tune with whatever age you're writing for and whatever age your character is. I think a lot of times, sometimes I tend to see a little bit of an author's voice popping in instead of a character's voice. So I always just try to make a note and say, would your character say something like this? Is this true to what they're feeling in the moment? So yeah, I would say just try to really stick to your character's headspace as often as you can. And again, I think just being in tune with whatever that age range is talking about, their kind of diction and language nowadays is helpful.
This is not necessarily about craft, but the technicalities of editing. Do you have any tools or techniques that you recommend for tracking revisions?
I can't say that I do. Again, I'm not a writer, but once we get into more linear edits, track changes, I feel is best for my authors. When we're at those higher level edits, I would hate for their file to just get bogged down in a whole bunch of line edit marks or track change marks. I always suggest to hold off on those until we're working like more granularly. My suggestion is for an author to always just use what works best for them, and hopefully things just work out from there.
Excellent. We sure have enjoyed getting to know you better.
Yes, it's so nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you all, especially before the retreat.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.